Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining. And thank you for filling out the poll. We just wanted to learn a little bit more about our audience today who's on the line with us. And it's great to see everyone introducing themselves and sharing where they're calling in from today. So as you can see from the poll results, we asked, do you have a background in water, wash, or agriculture? And a large majority of folks say yes, they do work in one of those fields. And the rest know a little bit about these, but maybe they're not their main line of work. And then the second question is, do you have any experience with early warning or remote sensing systems? And we have a little bit of a variety here. So we have some attendees today who have no experience at all. That's okay. We're going to dive into some background today, and some that know a little bit about early warning and remote sensing, but have never worked. And then it looks like a little bit of a majority have done some work with early warning and remote sensing. And then some are very familiar. So thank you so much for contributing to the poll. And welcome to our webinar today on early warning for food security using satellite-based crop and rangeland monitoring system. This event today is co-hosted by the Scale and ProWash Awards and funded by USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, or BHA. A special welcome today to our French speakers who are tuning in. We'd like everybody to be aware that we will be providing French interpretation for this event today. If you'd like to follow the event in French, you'll just need to click on the small globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen where it says interpretation, and then select French. Once you've selected French, you can choose to mute the original audio, or you can hear it in the background at just a little bit of a lower volume. You can also find a link to the presentation slides in French in the chat box just now, and you can follow along through the presentation with us. And if you have any technical issues today during the webinar, please send a chat message to Suzanne at ProWash. You can see her on your screen, and we will do our best to assist you. So before we begin, again, I invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat box if you haven't yet. If you have any questions during the webinar, I invite you to post your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat box, just to make sure that the questions do not get lost in the chat as we have other discussions. All questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and any questions that we don't get to today, we will be following up and including in a question and answer document that will be shared on the FSN Network website. You can also upvote questions in the Q&A box that you see from others that you'd like to be answered. So today's webinar will discuss a new collaboration launched in February between EGAD's Climate Predictions and Applications Center and the EU's Joint Research Center. This collaboration will provide better information on crop and rangeland conditions in East Africa. And the discussion will include how this work can support resilience food security activities, or RIFSAs, and other development projects in the region. And the presentation will be followed up by a Q&A. So first, just let me introduce myself quickly. My name is Ali Blumenstock, and I'm the Capacity Strengthening Advisor for SCALE program. For those who are unfamiliar with ProWash and with SCALE, SCALE is an initiative funded by USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, or BHA, to enhance the impact, sustainability, and scalability of BHA-funded agriculture, natural resource management, and alternative livelihoods activities in emergency and non-emergency contexts. And SCALE is implemented by Mercy Corps in collaboration with Save the Children. And ProWash is also funded by BHA and is led by Save the Children. ProWash aims to provide support to implementing partners in order to strengthen the quality of WASH interventions through capacity strengthening, knowledge sharing, and applied research opportunities. To learn more, you can visit the FSN Network website by clicking the links that were just shared in the chat box. So now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Jude, who is the Senior Specialist for Water Infrastructure and Governance for ProWash. Jude, over to you.
Hi, thanks so much, Ali. Thank you for that. And hello, everybody. Good day. Welcome to today's webinar. To begin the webinar, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. We have Viola Otieno. Viola is a geoinformations systems expert at IGAD's Climate Prediction and Application Center based in Nairobi in Kenya. Viola has more than 10 years of experience in the field of satellite image processing and analysis for environmental monitoring applications in forest, agriculture, and drought monitoring. Viola is currently involved in the implementation of various early warning systems at ICPAC, notably the East Africa Agriculture Hotspots and East Africa Drought Watch systems, which monitor drought and agriculture respectively. The second speaker is Felix Rembold. Felix is a senior scientific officer at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. Felix combines an academic background in tropical agriculture with a long research experience in the use of Earth observation for agricultural monitoring. Felix has lived in Africa for several years and has contributed to numerous international development projects with local EU and UN organizations. Felix is also an experienced trainer in the use of Earth observation and agrometeorological data for agricultural monitoring and yield prediction. So without further ado, let me hand over to our speakers, Viola and Felix. Over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and a big thank you to the organizers for inviting ICPAC and JRC to showcase the work that we are doing when it comes to early warning for food security. So without further ado, I will go to the presentation. Next, please. So this is the agenda. We will have a regional overview, and then we will look at the June assessments when it comes to crop and rangeland. And then eventually we'll look at the East Africa agriculture hotspot system itself. Next slide. So we thought it might be important to give a brief background of the region where we're working in, or the region where this system is being implemented. And the first thing to note is that approximately 70% of the region is highly dependent on subsistence, rain-fed agriculture. That's for both crops and animals. And also it's important to note that agriculture contributes significantly to the region's economy. The second point is that more than 80% of the region is classified under arid and semi-arid areas. Climate variability and change are one of the main drivers of food crisis, and this can be supported by the recently released UN report, the UN Sophie report. When you look at future climate projections, there's an indication that there will be increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather and climate events. So not just the number of drought or flood events, but we are seeing that it's possible that the intensity of these events could increase as well. So with all this in mind, it's very important, therefore, for the region to have a way to continuously monitor agricultural conditions across season and also across boundaries as well, as an early warning tool for early action. When we talk about the region, we're talking about 11 Eastern Africa countries that are covered by ICPAC, and that is Burundi, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Uganda. Next slide. So what is the solution that ICPAC is offering for the region to combat the things that we have talked about in the previous slide? Together with JRC, we have developed a system called East Africa Agriculture Hotspots. This is a public online system for monitoring crop and rangeland conditions. It provides automatic warnings every 10 days whenever there's poor or delayed vegetation. It's developed in collaboration with JRC through the project ICPAC, also commonly known as CLIMSA. It's very important for us to highlight that it's an adaptation of the ASAP system, the global system developed by JRC. So the illustrations at the bottom give us a very summarized workflow of how the system works. So we start with conditions in the field. These are recorded by satellites, and then using the satellite-derived data, we carry out analysis. And the most important thing is we are able to translate the analysis into actionable decision-making information. The keyword being actionable, to mean that whatever the results of the analysis, we translate this into information that someone can do something about. Next, please. So this is so from now on, we're going to show you some of the products from the system. The system is available online at agriculturehotspots.icpac.net. And what you see, the map that you see on your left is the original June 2021 assessment. And under this assessment, 4 countries have been classified as agricultural hotspots: South Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, and Kenya. So the 4 countries are classified as hotspots based on a couple of things. So one is the warnings from East Africa agricultural hotspots. This information is corroborated from field information as well. And then we also look at partner sources. So we look at GeoGlam, we look at ISAP, FSNWG, IPC, and other partners as well. Next slide. So on this particular slide, we show you 2 maps, and these are the actual products from the system. On the left map, you see the warnings that have been issued over crop areas, while on the right side, you see the warnings that have been issued over rangeland areas. So I would like to quickly direct your attention to the legend. If you look at the legend, you see that we have 4 levels of warnings. The first level of warning is the yellow, the dull yellow, and this warning is a water balance deficit. So if an area is shown to have a water balance deficit, it's colored yellow. The next level of warning, level 2, is a biomass deficit that is shown by the dark yellow or orange color. And then the third level of warning is when you have a water balance deficit and you also have a biomass deficit. So when you look at biomass deficit, we are measuring vegetation stress and we're looking at vegetation anomaly. And the 4th level of warning is what we are calling the end of season biomass deficit. And in this case, you have vegetation stress or you have vegetation anomalies, but also the growing season is coming to an end, and therefore chances of recovery are very minimal. Having said that, I would like us now to look at the information on the map. I would like to point you to Kenya, for example. So in Kenya, we have level 3 warnings when we're looking at the cropland warnings, so the map on the left. We have level 3 warnings in the coastal area, and then we have level 1 warnings in Uganda, and we also have level 1 and level 2 warnings in Ethiopia and also Eritrea as well. If you come to the map on the right showing the warnings over the rangeland areas, you can see that once again we have level 4 warning in the coastal area of Kenya, but also we have level 4 warning in the southernmost area of Somalia. We do have level 1 warnings in South Sudan, in Ethiopia, and in Eritrea as well. Next slide. So in this particular slide, we wanted to show you what we mean when we say continuous monitoring. So what we have displayed here is the evolution of the warnings. And you can see the warnings that were there in May, and the warnings that were there in June, and the warnings that were there in July. So the most interesting thing to point out is to look at the situation in the coastal Kenya. And you can see that the situation in May, we still had level 3 warnings. And this has persisted all the way from May to June and to July as well. If you look at the warnings in Ethiopia, you see that in May, the first 10 days of May, we had level 1, level 2, level 3, and actually level 4 warnings as well. But then there has been changes as from May all the way to July. And as of July, you can see we only have level 1 and level 2 warnings. Next slide. So after looking at the regional assessment, we wanted to show a bit of the national assessments as well. So just to zoom in a bit, and here we're showing you the Kenya assessment. And again, Kenya has been classified as a hotspot. The areas affected are mostly on the coastal regions. And if you look at the graph on your top right, you can see the NDVI rainfall time series graph. So the bars represent the rainfall, while the line graphs represent the NDVI, which is an indicator of vegetation. And if you look at the 2021 NDVI, you can see that since the beginning of the year for Kilifi, one of the counties in the coastal region, the NDVI has been well below average. But then if you look at the start of the season and up to now, the difference between the historical average and the current average is growing, it's expanding. This is quite different from the 2020, which is given by the light green line. You can see that in 2020, for the same period, the NDVI was well above the average. So if you combine this and the fact that the previous season, the March, April, May, had irregular and delayed rains, you can see that the marginal areas and the coastal areas are looking at a reduced production, crop production. I would also like to point you to the maps on the left, bottom left, and these are maps of rainfall anomalies, and these are from May all the way to June. In May, so the blues shows you above normal rainfall conditions, while the reds give you below normal rainfall conditions. So you can see in the month of May, most of the areas in Kenya had above normal conditions, except for the coastal area. But then the rainfall again subsided, and you can see that most of the areas again are now below normal conditions. Next slide. So we thought to show you Uganda, because Uganda is an interesting case where you do have a warning. However, Uganda is not classified as a hotspot, so it's classified as a non-hotspot. And the reason for that can be seen on the NDVI rainfall time series graph on the top right again. So if you look at the NDVI at the start of the season, the NDVI was below historical average, but then come end of April, beginning of May, when the region received a lot of rainfall, the NDVI became very similar to the historical average, but then the rainfall has subsided, and therefore the NDVI can be seen to be declining. However, the season is quite a long one, and therefore there is a chance of recovery, and that is why Uganda is not specifically classified as a hotspot. Next slide. So South Sudan is also an interesting one as well. So despite the fact that using the system there, we do not see any agrometeorological warnings, South Sudan is still classified as a hotspot because of the socioeconomic situation, conflict, the impact of the previous year 2020 floods, and also the impact of COVID as well. Again, if you look at the graph, you can see that the NDVI has actually been above normal, so above the historical average, but this is changing because it's going down and it's coming back to the average. However, we have to point out that exceptional vegetation conditions, because if you look at this, you can see 49% of the region has abundant vegetation, but we need to point out that exceptional vegetation condition does not necessarily translate to exceptional crop conditions. So that is something to keep in mind as well. I think that is it from me. I will hand over to my colleague, Felix. Felix, the floor is yours. Take it away from here.
Yes, hello everybody, and thank you very much, Viola, for this very clear introduction. So next slide. I will continue with a few more examples for other countries in the region, and then look a bit more in detail at some technical aspects of the system overall. So in a similar way as we have seen for the other countries, for Ethiopia, we also use the warnings as evidence for deciding whether it's an agricultural hotspot or not. As in most countries of the region, for the ongoing growing region, there is no major drought. There is no. It's not as in very bad years. The main areas affected are relatively marginal areas or minor seasons. That's the same in Ethiopia, where it is mainly the first crop season, so the bulk season, which is responsible only for a smaller part of the total production, which has been affected by irregular rainfall and low vegetation growth in March, April. Then there was very abundant rainfall in the first 10 days period of May and in the second, and that was followed by a dry period in June. Next slide. There's at the moment, I think most eyes of this community are probably pointed on the northern part of the country, to the Tigray region, because of the ongoing conflict there. And one interesting question is whether people are able to access their fields and to cultivate them in this region. So with another functionality and another section of this system, we can also use high resolution imagery, which allows us to zoom down to the single field level and to look whether a field is cultivated and in what conditions are the crop on this field. So if we do that right now at the beginning of the season, we can see if the orange areas or the dark orange areas there are fields which were planted at this time of last year but are not yet planted this year. So we cannot tell now with absolute certitude whether that's due to the ongoing conflict and to people not being able to cultivate there, or whether it's mainly related to the weather conditions. But I think by the end of the month and probably mid-August, it will be clearer whether this delay or whether this non-planted, less planting than in previous seasons will continue or not. Next slide, please. For Somalia, we also got automatic warnings about drought and water and vegetation anomalies, mainly for the southern part of the country and mainly for pastoral areas, because the system looks both at agriculture and pastoral areas separately. Overall, considering the country, which is very often exposed to drought, every third season, more or less, there is a drought. This year is not a major drought season. However, we still classified it as a hotspot because we can see in the upper right corner graph that all the rainfall was, or most of the rainfall was concentrated in only 2 10-day periods in end of April and early May. So because of this irregular distribution over time, we expect a low production of the first season, of the goose season. And one message here I would like to pass is that the automatic warnings, which are very useful for triggering, let's say, focusing on the analysis on a region, it is still important to look at all the other indicators related to rainfall and to vegetation to fully understand what's really happening. So the warnings are a good entry point, but it is also good to look at the other indicators. Next slide. Yeah, another way of using the warnings is by just putting them in a table and looking at the different regions of a country for a month. So I think this summarizes nicely the examples we have shown. Ethiopia had many more of its regions in different levels of warning in May than it does in June, when the rainfall situation improved with the start of the main season. While in Kenya, on the other side, the marginal areas that had level 3 or level 4 warnings already in May continue to have them, or they even become worse, deteriorate in June. Next. And this is just to show you that you can also look at the single indicators which are behind the automatic warnings in a spatial way. So just to repeat a bit what we have already said, the rainfall was temporarily concentrated in time, mainly in 2 10-day periods in May, with a very high intensity that also led to flooding, while it was lower than in the second part of May and also in June. This is useful to see because, of course, when the intensity is too high, then this can also cause damage to crops and can cause floods. Next slide. And floods in particular, that's something else that we can monitor and we can map with this system, because the 10 meters imagery, which is available every 5 days, that shows the surface water, as you can see here in dark blue, for around the capital of Middle Shabelle in Somalia. This is Jowar town, more or less in the middle. And by the 20th of May, it was completely surrounded by flooded fields. In many of them, we can assume that crops have been damaged by the floods. It is not shown here, but we also have the normal water distribution, the normal water, surface water for an average season, and so it is possible to compare the current flooding with what is normally expected, what is normally happening for that season. Next. Okay, those were the examples of the ongoing season to show a bit the potential and what kind of evidence the system provides for agricultural monitoring. I have a few more minutes just about general and technical details of the system to go a bit more in depth. Next. This is the homepage when you visit it, and you can probably recognize some of the maps we have already looked at. So by default, the first thing shown are these automatic warnings, anomaly warnings updated every 10 days. And then it is from there basically that the user can focus on single regions, zoom on these regions and look at the statistics for each of the region or at the high resolution cover imagery for these regions. Next. And just to make that point very clear, this is showing a bit the structure and the different components of the overall suite of tools. So we have just mentioned on the left side the entry window with the automatic warnings. This is also the place where one can visualize the spatial distribution of the indicators and to zoom in and see what happens for specific regions, and also visualize the crop masks and the rangeland masks that we are using. The window in the middle is where we can basically extract those statistics graphs for single indicators and their distribution over time, which is very useful for the analysis. All that can be downloaded and copy and pasted directly into reports. And then on the right side, you see this third window where you can load high resolution imagery of the Sentinel and Landsat sensors. And this is currently hosted by the JRC, but it doesn't really matter where it's hosted, because it basically calls, all the processing is done in a cloud environment by Google Earth Engine, and only the final images is returned or is shown in the map. So this makes it possible to use the whole system also with low bandwidth. You don't need to download any heavy images. Next. Yeah, and I think this has been shown already, so I can be very quick. It was just to say 3 more words about the 4 category of the automatic warnings. The point I would like to make is that it's not just transitioning from yellow to red because of let's say, the severity of a single indicator, but it looks at anomalies, so distance from the mean for 3 indicators and a 4th one, which is the time, which is the progress of the season. And so, in fact, the increasing severity is related to the convergence of evidence and to the time when it happens during the season. So if there's a strong anomaly which lasts from, let's say, middle of the season to the end, then we can assume that the crop failure is very likely, and then the warning level will turn dark red. Next. This is just to emphasize that for each of the indicators, they're fully available inside the system. So for those of you who in the poll clicked that they're familiar with remote sensing and they know what the NDVI is, the vegetation normalized difference vegetation indicator, all the most commonly used anomalies at the 10 daily level and at the cumulated level over the season can quickly be visualized and retrieved inside the system. And the same is for rainfall and rainfall anomalies. And all the maps, as you prepare them on screen and you visualize them there, can be downloaded as JPEGs, but also as geographically enabled layers that can be processed in a GIS. Next. Yeah, the same for the statistics. I think the time is nearly over, so I'm not going into what is shown there because we have seen it in the country examples. But just to make the point, I mean, all these graphs which are available for analysis once you find the graph that you like, it can be downloaded as a JPEG directly to be used in a report. And then last slide, next please. Now that we have seen with the examples and what the system does and how it works, I think it's very important to give some information, or at least our view, on how it positions in the landscape of existing regional food security and agricultural monitoring and assessment systems. So with the information that you have seen, we think that this is complementary and integrating nicely what the monthly analysis of the Food Security Nutrition Working Group that meets every month in Nairobi to discuss with all the partners involved food security information. This is really where satellite-based and weather data-based information can feed into what is already provided. And then more at the national level, for areas where there is a food security problem or a food security crisis, and where IPC acute analysis takes place, this can also feed very well the analysis as indirect evidence together with the IPC outcomes, which are of course based on surveys. So this is a bit the role we see for it. And the last point is that we think it's really important for at the country level also, because it's at the country level that IPC analysis takes place. And then last slide, I leave you with the links that I think you can also download from the presentation file. And the last point I want to make is that for capacity building, which is really crucial now, and which is a bit the next step we see in this, next week there will be a training for dedicated to ICPAC member states institutions from Monday to Wednesday. I think that was my part, so I hand over again to the chair, to Jude, for the question and answers session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viola and Felix, for that really interesting presentation. Really do appreciate it. So we'll now be beginning the Q&A part of this webinar. This is your chance as attendees to ask Felix and Viola any questions that you might have or make any observations. Please put your questions and observations in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, not in the chat box. If you wouldn't mind, please put it in the Q&A box. And I will ask the questions directly to the presenters, and they will provide answers to you. And so the first question that we have from Claudio is a very interesting one, and it puts a finger on something that I've been thinking about a lot too. And part of Claudio's question is, what has been the uptake from ministries of agriculture in the countries that the system covers? And I wondered if I could ask the panelists to just talk a little bit more about how this kind of information gets through to the ministries of agriculture and other decision makers, and whether there's work going on in that field at the moment. Over to you.
Thank you, Jude. That's a very good question. So the system, we launched it early this year, and the way we have done it so far is present the system and the outputs of the system during what we're calling the Climate Outlook Forum. So during the Climate Outlook Forum, we have what we call the co-production sessions, and during the sessions we have the agriculture and food security session, where experts from the region and are brought together. So in this way, we have made the information available to them. The other way is that during the FSNWG meetings, which take place every month, so we are working on incorporating the information from the system into the FSNWG community, which is a community of about 88 organizations working in food security in the region. In terms of the uptake, I can see for the various presentations that we have had, the feedback has been very positive, and what we are working on next step is synthesizing the information into knowledge products, which are then easier for people to assimilate, to understand, and to take actions based off of that. Yeah, I think that's what I would say. I don't know if Felix, you would have anything to add on that.
No, thanks, Viola. I think that was a very clear answer, so I have nothing to add to that. But I see there are other questions in the box.
Thanks, Viola and Felix, great answer there. And I can imagine that rolling this out as information products and getting this information onto the desks of decision makers is a whole project all in itself. And it sounds like you've got some really great initiatives there. The second question we have is from Alex, and it's really a two-part question. The first is, Alex, in the light of the varying seasonalities due to early or late rains, do you recommend crop varieties and technologies at all at the moment to maximize productivity? That's the first part. And then the second part Alex asked is, what capacities are required for farmers and policymakers in the respective affected areas to adopt and adapt accordingly? And do you have any efforts at the moment to facilitate these capacities? So essentially we're saying, are you going so far as to recommend different kinds of crops and technologies? And are you facilitating capacities at all of farmers and policymakers, or is it a bit early to say? Over to you.
Thanks, Jude, and also Alex for asking the interesting question. I mean, to be very frank with you, I think I would be a liar if I told you that we can answer that question directly and alone, because it is really rich and difficult question. I mean, it goes down to what kind of crops are best adapted to changing climate for different locations. I think this is really too detailed for us. I mean, we're looking only at the climate variability and climate extremes, and our aim is to warn about when they happen as early as possible, and if possible even before they happen. What I can say, however, is that with what we have seen in the last years running this system, I mean, the climate change is happening and the climate variability is increasing, and as you also say, I mean, rain tends to come in shorter and more intensive events. So, I mean, all we can only confirm at the general level that steps for adaptation are very necessary. Increasing, differentiating crop varieties, using shorter crop cycle crops, using adapting practices, and looking what farmers do in other regions that have similar problems. These are basic steps. I mean, that does not fully answer the question, of course, but I have to admit that the system is not specific, and I mean, doesn't go down locally enough to the local level to fully answer your question. For the capacities, I think what is important is that both farmers and policymakers, they have a basic awareness and understanding about climate variability and what climate extremes mean. And I think it is also important that both of them are aware to where to look at finding information about climate adaptation. This is not fully, I mean, this is not really our aim to make that available, but definitely we can, I think we can help in that discussion, and we can be part of the discussion. So I have colleagues, for example, who are dealing with climate adaptation and what it means for policymakers. And I think that this information just feeds into the discussion and gives the continuous monitoring information, but it does not answer all the questions you ask. I hope that helps at least a bit. Thanks.
Thanks, Felix. As you say, it's a complex issue, and you know, the early warning system is one link, and a very important link in this value chain, which ends up with better food and water security and better resilience to climate change. So Runyararo asks a question which also puts a finger on another important link in this chain, and that is the role of the targeted communities. Do they at the moment play any role in these monitoring systems, and are there any initiatives to engage with those communities at the moment?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you for that. So at the moment, the role of the community will be sort of a feedback role. So the system gives the early warning, and then, but like we said, with remote sensing, you cannot answer all the questions. And therefore we depend on not necessarily the community, but maybe the national focal points to then be able to give feedback. So say there's a level 4 warning, then the national focal points can be able to add more information in terms of what is going on the ground. So that's how I would say the community's role in terms of the monitoring system. And probably in future, then we could be, if we see a situation whereby we could be able to incorporate the feedback from the communities, not necessarily into the system, but incorporate them into improving the system.
Thanks a lot, Viola. Thanks, Viola. Interesting, and obviously this is I would imagine a work in progress to as you refine the system and as you iterate towards more local level and fine resolution warnings. The communities, I would guess, would become more critical to those in that stage. We have a technical question from an anonymous attendee at the moment, which is that in your presentations, there were large areas that were listed as not analyzed. Can you explain the reasons for this and whether you plan to include these not analyzed in future analysis?
Yes, thank you, Jude. This is finally a question which is easy to answer. So I would like to thank the anonymous attendee, even if we don't know his name yet. So basically what this means is that the areas don't have large enough agriculture or pastoral surface in their, which are located in that area, or that those areas, if they are there, are at the moment not active. That can happen if you are in a very dry season, in a dry season between agricultural seasons, for example. Then such a unit could be in not analyzed, or because there is not enough agriculture. So for example, the northern regions in Kenya, the ASAL regions, I think many of them are not analyzed because agriculture is not really the main, is not really relevant there. I think we have a threshold of being at least 1% of the total area in that unit. I hope that explains.
Thank you, Felix. Makes perfect sense to me. Thank you. So we have a question from Wendy here. You mentioned in the presentation that you'll be offering some upcoming training and capacity building. Could you elaborate a little more on the upcoming training and capacity building to stakeholders who will be making decisions with this information? And if possible, can you describe any skills that you're prioritizing and whether you have different levels or skill needs as a requirement for this capacity building?
Okay, I'll take that one. So the training that Felix mentioned that's going to be happening next week is specifically for national focal points. So we are getting a few people from each country, from the Ministry of Agriculture and also from the meteorological agencies as well. And we are training them on how to use the system, but also how to interpret the system as well. We will be looking at the new bulletin, the regional bulletin that ICPAC is developing based off the system, and then also seeing how does it fit into the national information products that the countries might already be producing. So it's a very on-the-job kind of training where we want the member states to be able to use the system, but also to be able to interpret the results of the system. So that's the training that will be happening next week.
Thank you, Viola. Fantastic. Thank you very much. And there's actually another question linked closely to that from an attendee who asks, are there certificate-based courses that might help actualize a career pathway in remote sensing? And what I'd say to that is that at the end of this webinar, we'll be compiling all of the questions into a document, and the presenters will provide answers to those, and will probably be able to provide some links or some information on that issue in that document. In other words, on what are the potential courses or are there ways to move forward in a career in this field. So we'll be asking the presenters to provide a little bit of information on that in that document, which will be emailed to all attendees today. Moving on, another technical question from Sambulisiwe, which is quite simply, what do you use for your precipitation data?
Yeah, thank you. That's quickly answered. So we, after analysis of in comparison of the different data available, we decided to use the CHIRPS data, which are produced in the United States by a group in University of Santa Barbara. And for other regions outside the IGAD, which are in the larger system, in the global system, we complement those with ECMWF data for the higher latitudes. Maybe just to answer also the last question that I've seen, which is related to that, for the areas which are not analyzed, the non-analyzed only refers to the automatic anomaly warning, but all the underlying indicators, including rainfall, vegetation, and so on, that is still collected, processed, and available when you will always get the statistics graphs for those units. The only thing which is not there is the automatic anomaly warning for crops and rangelands. Stevens, that was the reply to Stephen Wright's question.
Thanks, Felix, and well spotted there. Thank you for that. That's interesting to know. We have a question here, which is perhaps a little more open-ended, that's been raised by Eduard, which is essentially, given that this is a climate vulnerable sub-region, and we've talked a little bit about this already in the webinar, what are your recommendations, if any, to governments and policy actions taken to cope with potential food crises? So I think to rephrase that a little bit, are you at the moment giving any kind of more specific advice to decision makers on what to do with some of this data? Or is that something that is outside of the scope of the project and something that would be up to the decision makers themselves? But I wondered if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit more about that kind of extra link between the technical information that's being provided and how that actually becomes policy, or would that be something that, as I say, it's something that's at the moment outside of the scope of the project? Over to you.
I can start, and then maybe Viola to complement. I would just say it's not outside the scope of the project, but it should not be done in isolation by the project. So I think it is very, very important what I tried to say on the last slide, that the information we provide flows into the regional discussion that takes place and is compared and integrated with other information. And then I think the best is that the regional committees and groups of experts such as the Food Security Working Group, but also the as WFP, I'm sure you are familiar with all those teams, the second pillar of the Global Report on Food Crisis and so on, which are all the special bodies who are supposed to provide answers for response and to shorten the distance, let's say, the gap between early warning and response. So I think it feeds into, it's one element that feeds into the discussion, but it should not be the one that gives answers alone to policymakers in the region. Viola, I don't know, what is your view on that?
I think you've covered it quite well, Felix. Yes, so I think at the end of the day, there needs to be collaboration and cooperation between maybe projects within the organization, but also within organizations as well, across organizations as well. So this is just one component that provides early warning information. But then if you work with other people who are focused on other aspects of the chain, then we might be able to get better outputs out of that. So I think Felix summarized it very well. So we need collaboration and cooperation. Yeah.
But perhaps it links also to the comment by the colleague from Zimbabwe, which I think is very clear. I mean, the information in this system, it should not replace any existing structure in the countries or in the region. It should just help and feed information in where it is necessary and where it is not already there. So am fully sympathetic with Noah Kutukwa from Zimbabwe, who says that this could perhaps be helpful or be integrated with the crops and livestock assessments, which are already done in Zimbabwe and that I'm familiar with. So I fully support that proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Felix and Viola. And I'm very glad Noah raised that question because one thing that's been, we've discussed this a little bit already, and one question that really begs to be asked is, how can this system be rolled out in other regions in Africa? As somebody from the SADC region in Southern Africa or the West African region, what might be the constraints to rolling this out? And I know we spoke a little bit about the balance between the kind of technical assets, the satellites and the systems, but also the human and the training assets, the institutional assets for rolling out an early warning system like this. I wondered if you'd mind just talking a little bit about that balance and perhaps giving your thoughts as to how we could roll this out, for example, in the SADC region, where it would be really, really valuable. Over to you.
Just very quickly, Yola, please go on. Yeah.
No, I was just saying I will let you start.
Okay. No, I think, our experience is that, for example, working directly with organizations who are based in the region, either at the regional level, such as ICPAC, or at the country level, such as many of the Met departments or agriculture or Ministry of Agriculture or even research centers, this is working very well. So in general, I think for us as a research center based in Europe, it's important that we do not just set up and run everything in Italy, because although it works well and the internet connection is nice, it will not be useful, it will not be shared, and will not be co-owned by anybody. So we were very lucky to have these frames, existing frames like the CLIMSA project, but also the other similar frames like the GMES in Africa project or the E-Station, which we can use to strengthen the collaboration with the regional centers and with countries directly. So I think this is really the crucial part. Viola?
Okay, so maybe just to add on that as well is that the beauty or the interesting thing of working with regional or national centers is that it allows for customization of the system. So the ASAP is a global system, but then you're able to customize the system to reflect the conditions or the local conditions. So that is one of the things that might be important or interesting to look at when you're redeploying this at a local or regional level.
Thanks, Felix and Viola. Thank you very much. And I'd love to see this rolled out. I'd love to see ICPAC coming down to SADC and telling us how to install a similar system or work on that. Now, we only have 4 or 5 minutes to go, I'm afraid. So I'm going to bring the Q&A session to an end. Just to remind you, we will be sending a document with all of the questions and their answers from the speakers to all of the attendees. So if you've posted a question that hasn't yet been answered, we will be answering it, don't worry. That information will be coming your way. As we close, we'll be putting a poll up on the screen just to get some of your feedback on the session. And the 2 poll questions there are, in your opinion, how useful are early warning and resilient systems such as we've discussed? And the second question is, did you find the content of this webinar relevant to your work? So please take a moment to answer those polls. And while we're waiting for the results of those to come through, I'd just like to remind you as well that we'll be sending out a recording of this webinar and the webinar PowerPoint slides in both English and in French to you attendees, and they will also be available on the FSN website, so that anybody that you know who might be interested in this information, please feel free to share that with them. And please stand by. We'll be sending that information out in the next 2 or 3 days. Also, please don't hesitate. If you have any other questions for Felix and Viola, you can reach out to us by email in the coming days, and we'll pass those on to the speakers. So please, as I say, please take a moment just to fill in those two polls on your screen, and we'll be closing them in just a second or two. But it's looking to me like there's great support for finding this. There's great support for more of these webinars, and most people are saying this is extremely useful and should be rolled out much more widely. Thank you for that. I know we have a bit of a captive audience in the sense that folks who've signed up to this are interested in it in the first place. But to me, this is a hugely important initiative by ICPAC, and something that I would love to see not only used more in the region and rolled out more widely with more awareness, but in other regions too. I think the potential is enormous. So we have the poll results in now, and as I say, for the first one, there were a few folks who didn't think it was useful to, and that this information is for specialists only. But most people, more than 3/4 of the people said either this is very useful or extremely useful and should be rolled out much more widely. Thank you very much for that. The second poll question, did you find the content of this webinar relevant to your work? Well, I'm very happy to say that 72% of people say very relevant, with another 20% saying it's relevant. So thank you for that. And I think it is something that is going to be more relevant as time goes on, as we have more of a focus on climate change and more of a focus of leveraging the information and the assets that we have to make decision-making on water and food security more reliable and more helpful to decision makers. And quite frankly, we need all of the help that we can get in this area. And I'm going to be fascinated in the coming months and years to see how this rolls out in WASH and in agriculture in some of the regions in Africa. And I really wish this project all the best. So I see it's 10 o'clock now, and so we're going to bring this webinar to a close. Thank you very much to all the attendees for attending. I see there are folks from the United States and the Americas, all the way over in the West, all the way through to Asia in the East, Africa, Europe. We have attendees from all over. Thank you very much for attending. We'll be back in touch with you shortly with some of the information, and we're going to be sharing, details of further webinars and further initiatives in this field with you too. Please also keep an eye on the FSN Network website, and as Felix and Viola have said, on the excellent ICPAC website for some of the initiatives and some of the data that's being rolled out. So once again, thank you to everybody for attending, and thank you in particular to Felix Rembold and Viola Tieno for today's presentation. Really appreciate it. Thank you, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you too. Thanks also to the interpreter.
Yeah, thank you.